What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be ranking top historic decks from 1 through 10. So it's going to be a tier list. So let's get started. All right. So this past weekend, I was able to take down the Hooglandia Open with Tainted Pact. It was a double limb tournament. I lost once to Gruel, but was able to squeak out 10 more to easily win that tournament. It was super awesome, and honestly just made me realize how above, like like based off of my draws and stuff, how above this deck is as compared to every other deck. So in the S tier, we're going to be placing Tainted Pact. It's above everything, and as people start to realize what is the more what is the better build of the deck, you're gonna see the results skyrocket. So Tainted Pack right now includes a blue-black version which has Lurrus in it, has a Sultai version, and has a Grixis version. The one I played was Grixis. I have a video on it with a sideboard guide. Check that out if you already haven't. Let's move on to the other decks. All right, this is Damir Rogues. So a lot of my rankings are going to be based off of what's going to be happening in the future. And what's going to happen in the future is Tainted Pact is going to shape the meta. In the tournament that we played this past weekend, I played against Tainted Pact in the first round. And it was a back and forth match, went to game 3, but I was able to squeak it out. I then saw that same opponent 7 rounds later in the top 5 of this double limb tournament. And I was like, I'm not surprised. The deck is that busted. It also just had such a vastly high win rate while not being piloted to its maximum. And that's because there's so many one-ofs. It's a really difficult deck to play, and there's so many ways to play it. So Blue-Black Rogues happens to be one of the decks that can attack Pact in a very effective way. So but I think that it lines up pretty mediumly against the rest of the format, and it has some flaws. I don't think the deck should be playing 4 brainstorms because it locks itself out so often. So I'm going to be putting Rogues in the B tier. Next we have Goblins. Goblins was a pretty dominant deck before all these new cards entered the format, the anthology. So I feel like this has now become a thing of the past, and people understand the play patterns and how to attack this deck. And with the printing of Memory Lapse and Thoughtseize, the strategy has kind of become bad, and it still preys on decks like Gruel and Green White Company, but I think that Muxus is no longer a real king, and I'm going to be placing Goblins in the D tier. Next we have Jeskai. Jeskai control is gonna include blue-white control. It's too difficult to just break these decks up too much. But I think that Jeskai the Jeskai deck has had a decent showing. But I think that is a response to people not having the proper builds of deck. The Jeskai deck is very simple to play and to build, right? There's not much controversy on the build. Yes, there's a Torrential Gear Hulk version and there's a non-Torrential Gear Hulk version. But at the end of the day, the build is very simple. And so I think that as time progresses, as things progress, I'm 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 guessing that this deck is going to see a lot less play, especially if my version of Tainted Pact takes off. If you watch my match against Jeskai, it feels as though I can navigate the games into such a spot that Jeskai has almost no chance at winning. So I'm going to put Jeskai in the C tier. Next we have Black Red Arcanist, and I think Black Red Arcanist is a real sleeper. I think that the amount of Grafdigger's Cage that was seeing play has lessened by a lot, but Rest in Peace has gone up. And so we're kind of in this weird spot where a lot of decks aren't playing that much graveyard hate, Tainted Pact included. So Black Red Arcanist, I think, does well against Pact, one of the best decks against it, but against the rest of the format, it's not as good. It has the same problem as Blue Black Rogues, where the most optimal build hasn't been found because this version of the deck gets hit so hard by graveyard disruption. So I don't think that it's ready for S tier or A tier. It's gonna be right there with the Rogues. Same thing. Good meta call choice, but not always the best choice because graveyard hate can definitely cost you a match in the tournament. So we're gonna put it in B tier. All right, Shadow is a absolutely new deck, new archetype that I think we're going to see a lot more of moving forward. So this past weekend, we saw Matt Bemonte in the finals against myself, and he was playing this very innovative black-white Orzhov shadow deck, and I thought the deck was super interesting. He played against Tainted Pact quite a bit and completely dismantled them. I had to play against him twice because he was actually undefeated, and since it's a double limb tournament, I actually had to beat him twice. So the deck had some really cool elements to it, but the main elements that I want to talk about is Thoughtseize, Inquisition, and Elite Spellbinder. That combination with a Adonto Vanguard in the middle of it put the deck in a really strong position against Tainted Pact that rely way more on the combo. My version of Tainted Pact has more threats with like Jace and Crackling Drake, so I was able to dismantle it, but I totally understood why this Orzhov deck was such a good choice and why it ran through the tournament completely undefeated until Matt played against me, and I was able to just completely 4-0 it. No matches lost, no games lost actually. So, but that was because I had a secondary plan. But if people are playing this other version of Tainted Pact, the more popular, just blue-black Luris, reliant more on the combo, this black-white deck is going to completely run over it because it has threats that are really hard to remove, that are cheap, and really good interaction while putting the pressure on. So I think that Shadow is going to start to see more and more forms. I can totally imagine a black-red Shadow deck. I can totally see black-red Arcanist picking up Shadow as another threat. There are so many different combinations that we could see, and I'm honestly excited for it. And so I think that this new archetype, being well positioned against Tainted Pact and the rest of the format, as we saw in that tournament, I think the Shadow, I'm going to say specifically Orzhov Shadow, is going to be in the A tier. People don't know how to play against it. And this is why Historic is so great. Innovation is still allowed. The format is wide enough and deep enough that cool decks like Orzhov Shadow are coming out of nowhere, and that makes me so happy and so stoked for the growth of this format. All right, next we have Jund Sacrifice. This was hands down the best deck before this last set, before Strixhaven came out, and it's kind of fallen off. But I don't think it's necessarily like the worst choice. I think it does well against a lot of the decks that existed in the past. Like, I think it does well against Black Red Arcanist. I think it does well against Blue Black Rogues. We know how it lines up against Goblins. It's favored. It's gonna do well against like all of the fair decks, but with it having a bad matchup against Tainted Pact, I can't imagine that I would want to walk into a tournament and play this deck unless some dramatic shift happens in the deck where it's able to include more cards that help deal with the Tainted Pact combo while putting on the pressure. I think Cat is kind of out of it. It is not one of the premier decks anymore, and so I'm going to place Jund Sacrifice in the C tier, where it deals with a lot of the stuff that's going on, but it's honestly a strategy that's like more reliant in grinding against the more normal mid-range strategies and aggressive strategies. Next, we have Gruel, and Gruel is the go-to aggro deck in the format, and its answer to Tainted Pact or any deck for that matter is just be as fast as possible. Just play the most amount of power and Ember Cleave it so your opponent doesn't have a chance to do whatever they're trying to do. And that works a lot, right? You have a possibility of just going Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, another 2-drop, Ember Cleave, and the game is over. They can end the game easily on turn 3 if their draw permits it. And so Gruel has had high numbers and has had good results overall. So, I mean, Gruel is between A and B. It's very, very close. But since it didn't have a good showing this weekend, I think I'm going to put it in the B tier. But it could easily be A tier on any given weekend. So, Gruel, a B tier deck. All right, the next two decks. All right, so the next deck we have is Phoenix. And with Blue-Red Phoenix, I'm also going to include Temur Phoenix, and I'm also going to include the Blue-Red Prowess list from Crokies. And so I think that a lot of these shells have adapted by becoming more aggressive and or having a lot of sideboard slots, like there's a cycling bird that can counter a trigger, so that is a card that lines up well against Tainted Pact. So I feel like the Blue-Red Phoenix deck from its original shell has adjusted the most to it, but I think it's still a little bit off. It's still a little bit shaky. And I think it's not that well positioned. I think it could be better positioned. Even though these adjustments have happened, it leaves the deck in kind of a weird spot. I don't think it's gonna do well against Gruel. I think it's less aggressive than Gruel. I think it has like a 50-50 matchup at best there. I think that it's in a bad spot against Arcanist. I think it's at best 50-50 with Rogues. I think it's in a bad spot against Shadow. I think it's in a bad spot against Tainted Pact. So even though I love the shell and I think that it's a good deck against most of everything that's not on this chart, it just puts it in a weird spot until we have a more innovative take on Phoenix or Tainted Pact gets banned. I think I have to put Phoenix in the C tier. And that makes me really sad. But I truly believe that it's a 50-50 at best against most decks. And a lot of the S and A tier decks, it is just not as well positioned. All right. Lastly, we have Green White Company. And I think Green White Company is really good. It's very good. Very underrepresented. Uh, I think one of the decks that has made me think it's no longer an S tier is all of the Angel shells or Elves shells or Merfolk shells. And these decks have been popping up way more than I expected. But that's the beauty of Historic, where you can play these strategies and they can be good. And they can prey on decks like Gruel, and they can prey on decks like Green White Company. So Green White Company is an absolute beast against the actual top tier decks. But it has a weakness. Its kryptonite is all of these decks that you never expect. So I'll be just casually loading up my Green White Company, and I'll just get paired against Angels 5 times in a row. And I can't win that matchup in a million years. It feels impossible. No sideboard slot can fix that matchup. And the Angel Shell / Elves or Merfolk are showing up to tournaments in decently large numbers that you should be concerned. And so even though I think that it's a killer against these specific decks, I cannot give it the S tier mark, but I will give it a solid A in terms of against the rest of the format, because it puts up a good fight against S tier. And I've been really impressed. Yeah, so that concludes my tier list. If you have any questions or like you want to challenge me on some of these, feel free to leave the comments below and I will try to answer all the questions. But anyways, thank you for watching. These are subject to change. So as the format progresses, I'll make sure I'll make a new one. But thank you for watching, and make sure you hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you next time. Peace.